Hello. And like always, zero ends. Welcome again to another wonderful session of the Zero Ends channel. And we are continuing off or where we left off. And as always, the title of this stream is titled The Book of Endz, Volume 1, Strong Black Woman and Mental Illness, Part 2. This is Section 2. And let me do this. Hold on, people. I'm trying to figure something out. All right. So, as always, if you have not been catching some of the previous podcast / live streams of these readings of this particular series in Zero Ends channel, go back to the replay of every broadcast, including this one. I think this is a very educational session in regards to the relationship between the strong black woman myth and mental illness amongst the African American community, and we could also say abroad as well, because this ease is global actually when it comes to the black woman and her beliefs that she does well by or all bad by herself. But as we know, the climate and throughout the decades, that is not the case. And so many of the total important aspects of her life is a reflection of the lie that was taught on her about this strong black woman myth. So the purpose, like all types of information, is to dispel this and to reveal the inner truth of it is a mental illness. And this was researched and done by another black woman to really look into the mindset of black women in regards to the strong, independent, and why I don't need no man, etc. So, like always, information like this is always to be looked at, analyzed, and to take it from a broad brush. And this might hurt a lot of feelings to a lot of women that are Black in this community or abroad. But nonetheless, we do this for educational purpose. And if your feelings are hurt and you feel offense to the information given to you, then by conclusion, you are like what this woman has researched, delusional, sick in the head, and need to look and get therapy for your mental illness. I will do one more thing and we shall begin. So sit back. We can now begin now. So let's start. And we're going to continue where we left off. Black women and health beliefs. And let's go down. Mirroring the general statistics on the disparities in health and well-being between Black and whites, the evidence confirms that Black women experience greater chronic illness and suffer greater risk of mortality relating to these illness than a white woman. And it's written by Black and Peacock, 2011. Okay. Although there has been a growing amount of research considering factors that exist for Black women that may impact health, ranging from social, psychosocial, environmental stressors, misguided health practice or beliefs, ineffective delivery of health message to the Black female community, Black and Peacock states that no clear explanation for the race disparity has emerged. They and others and have suggested that the problem might be traced to particular beliefs ascribing to the black or to by black women, and how these may guide daily life management decisions, including health and well-being. And this is from Clark O'Malley, Johnson, Schoenberg, and Lance of 2009, Hickerson, etc., 2010. One of the other observations made by Blacks and Peacock, 2011, was that sustainable role that spirituality and religion plays in the lives of many Black women. There is a literature on depression and mental illness in Black populations that suggests how strong religious beliefs might inhibit well-being behaviors, particularly when it comes to counseling or other therapeutic support for emotional and psychological distress. In Ramon's 2020 or 2000 report, how one Black female client in her therapeutic practice expressed doubt about the counseling process, saying, she thought God must have wanted her broken somehow, that there was a driven plan to her emotional and psychological distress, and that perhaps seeking counseling was in a way going against God's will. Baldwin Laitman, 2005, quote, one Black female writer, Meryl Nia Annie Daquan, who reports on her struggles with depression and describes the incredible of a Black female friend when she said she was seeking therapeutic intervention. Take your troubles to Jesus, not no damn psychiatrist or psychiatrist. That's Dr. Quinn, 1998, page 21, as cited by Bentolf Lafonte, or Bellero Lafonte, 2005, page 108. Black women and obesity. The evidence of the Black women are more likely to be overweight or obese and to suffer the negative health and well-being effects associated with the condition is sustainable. It also suggests a long-standing issue within the Black community, as the CDC data analysis in Burke and Helen 2008 research showed that for the last 35 years, Black women have report rates of obesity prevalence at twice the rate of white women and Black and white males. Boltrus, Lynch, Everson, Rose, Raghin, or Raghin Clippen, 2005, provides the results of a 34-year longitude case study of the patterns for race, sub-economic factors, and body weight trajectories in Alameda County, California, or Alameda County. The final cohorts cover 6,928 adults drawn from a Stratfield random sample beginning in 1965 and tracks the individual by 17 years and older. An initial survey was combined and then the cohort was re-stamped for additional times: 1974, 1983, 1994, 1999. As you see the trajectory of the patterns here through these years, from 1974 up to 1983, that's roughly 9 years. 1994 and 1999, roughly 5 years. And these are timetables. The Black adult in the study shows a tendency to be heavier than their white counterparts throughout adulthood. However, the research described the weight differential between Blacks and white men as modest, while the difference between Black women and white women was deemed large. Let's pause right there for a second. And this is by Beltris Extra AI 2005, page 1598. Let's stop right here. Now, why is it, if we really think about it, because we know from other podcast streams, if you know people that have been talking about the weight difference between blacks and whites, that the black male has not really shown substantial super obesity in this country at most. With all the food, all the preservatives, all the abs, etc. The black male counterpart is not, from what this little short research, and if we really dig to the present, has not shown much a difference in serious obesity in this country. And my conclusion why that is, surprisingly, and I say surprising because if we think about it, this was done by other military experts. One, that there was I believe there was a YouTube video of a Caucasoid man that was in uniform. How he find it that obesity in this country was what it called a federal issue, which is a danger to national security. Now, what do they mean by this? They mean that non-black people have obesity problem, particularly the European male of this country. But his competition, the black male, but imagine I'm still staying onto the subject of black women, that the black male has not shown much of the effect with everything put in this environment besides death by physical violence or other means. So when they talk about, say, there are some men that are fat, that are African American or ADOS black here in this country, I understand. But here's a twist between men and women, that the African woman, aka ADOS, or just the black woman in general, don't know that you have gained double your weight over the decades, and it has shown reflections in not only on you but the community and how the men look at you overall. That they say that the brothers are just as fat as women. No, that's wrong. The man today, regardless of everything, has not really moved much in regards to the serious health epidemic in his country compared to the sister. Why is that? It goes back in previous broadcasts, if you notice, because of her decision making, her lifestyle, the little stress that she suffers, and that is voluntary, that leads to why she is the way it is, obese, especially if she carrying children, makes her double or twice fat. So when they talk about, say, the most issues that the black woman is facing now in the 21st century, especially here in America, and I say only America, outside America is a little different, is because you do have a weight problem and you've refused to correct that and get that check. And not doing this because you want to look good just to make sure you're slim and up par weight, but you keep your health in order. And you can't maintain it if you are 50 or greater pounds overweight. And they said now the average woman today is roughly, the black woman is gaining an extra 45 to 50 pounds. So that's something to really think about, that you have kept getting bigger over the times because of the factors that you put yourself. That's not on the male's fault. That's on you, ladies. So this is something that you have to address and correct. But let's move on. Black women's weight more at the 1965 baseline than white females at 4,906 kilograms more, and gains 0.10 kilograms more each year than did white women, resulting in a large percentage of the black female cohorts approaching obesity at the end of the longitudinal studies. It will appear, based on the research discussing here, that the serious and disproportionate greater relative to other populations problems of overweight and obesity in black females in the extracts. One, this fact has implications in terms of identifying and understanding the cause underlying obesity prevalence and black female population, as well as for devising effective intervention to reduce rates of obesity. The imperative to do so is clear, as the health and well-being literature indicates. Several of the health conditions that have geared recent research attention specifically in relations to Black female populations, as noted or are noted here, to illustrate the significance of the problem. Pregnancy risk. Pregnancy, despite being a joyfully condition for many women, is attended by a host of physical challenges, some of them quite serious. The condition of overweight and obesity exacerbates the natural difficulties associated with pregnancy and may produce new and additional problems for expectancy mothers. Holder, 2008, and Lawanda, 2014, and Vaharian, 2009. These studies note the compelling evidence that has immense demonstrating that overweight and obesity women tend to experience more problems conceiving than do their normal weight peers. Other factors being equally, and that overweight and obesity women also have a higher rate of adverse outcomes both for themselves and for their pregnancy. Holder 2008 cites a study of Missouri women conducted between 1978 and 1999 or 1997 that shows a average obese women were 40% more likely to experience a stillbirth, or what they call a stillbirth, than were women of normal weight for women at the low end of the obesity scale. The stillbirth rate was approximately 30%, but for the smaller pool of extremely morbid or morbidly obese women, the rate of stillbirth climbs to almost 60%. Holder added that while patterns of risk was similar for Black and white women, every risk category totals greater prevalence for Blacks. This is certainly relating to Vaharian of 2009 reports that Black women have the highest prevalence of overweight and obesity among all cohorts of women of childbearing age, identified as 20 to 44 years of age, according to the 2002 National Survey of Family Growth, NSFG. And that from 20 to 44, that is roughly, if my math is right, a generation or 24 years skit. And really it should start from 18 to 35, but because it's research, it's a different topic. And because the people that's giving birth a little later now, this is like an old partial of the study. Still could be looked at today for those who still give birth late, but is considered high risk. Now, stillbirth, not sure what that is. So before we go on, let's do a quick Google and find what this stillbirth is, because to those that don't know, and this is educational purpose only, we're going. Let me look this up. Okay. Stillbirth is the delivery after the 20th week of pregnancy of a baby who has died. Loss of a baby for the 20th week of pregnancy is called a miscarriage. A baby is stillbirth in about 1 in 200 pregnancies. This is as recent as 2009. And this is like a short little definition. So let's move on. Okay. Obesity has been conclusive shown to increase a pregnant woman risk of premenopause and epilepsy, chronic hypertension, and diabetes. Now I know of one woman that because she was very fat, and she is still today, unfortunately. When she gave birth to her first child, she had to go to the doctor and get all extra tests, drink this thing to test if she has or is gaining the potential of all the above, from epilepsy to hypertension to diabetes while carrying her child. So the heavier you are, ladies, the more you fall under this range, unfortunately. And mind you, there are big women that have given birth. I ain't gonna lie about that. But I never look at the potential risks of how they're successfully giving birth. Now, I'm not sure if this applies to all women, but since the study has been conducted and it's still ongoing now and updated, this is still a high risk if you're too fat. So these conditions can prove problematic for expectancy mother health and are potentially fatal to fetus and sometimes fatal to mothers as well. Holder 2008 note that the obese women in Missouri referenced by the research experienced stillbirth defines as an utero fetal death at the 20-week or more gestation mark at a rate of 8.5 versus 5.5 for a normal weight woman per 1,000 live births. In addition, the more obese the mother, the higher the stillbirth rate climbs to 11.7 per 1,000 live births for extremely obese mothers. The stillbirth rate among obese women also are impacted by race. Black obese women average stillbirth at a rate of 11.4 versus 7.8 for the white obese woman, resulting in stillbirth rates for obese black women that was over the twice the rate of that for their normal weight counterpart. An interest finding from Faharian 2009 analysis of statistics was that the rates of obesity in black families in childbearing age were higher for those women with consistent health coverage. Black women with irregular health insurance coverage report lower rates of obesity. For white women, the correlation between health insurance and obesity ran in the other direction, such that those women with consistent coverage report the lowest rates of obesity. The findings for Black women were mirrored to a lesser degree in Hispanic populations. The more secure the health insurance, the greater the likelihood towards obesity. Let's read that again. Findings for Black women were mirrored to a lesser degree in Hispanic populations. The more secure the health insurance, the greater the likelihood towards obesity. Interesting. Faharian studies was no design to account for or explain such factors, so the research speculates that this counterintuitive trend of more secure health insurance, higher rates of obesity in Blacks and Hispanic women might relate to cultural difference in ideal body norms, derives from culture perception regards image, wellness, and financial security. In layman of other evidence providing support for alternate interpretations, Faharian reads of this trend may have some authority. Much of the literature discussed in this chapter suggests that a predicted relationship exists between Black women and self-identity. Subculture beliefs about body image and weight and a tendency towards overweight and obesity. Budge at 2010, Davis, Clark, Crease, Garrett, and Copper, 2005. Diabetes and heart conditions. Benova Lofim, 2005, reports that the interview with 12 Black female subjects revealed that 2/3 of the women had close female relatives who were obese, and several of the subjects themselves were overweight or obese, and identifying a range of serious health problems experienced by their obese female families members and related to their weight, high blood pressure, stroke, cognitive, heart failures, diabetes, thyroid problems, and kidney failure. Diabetes is particularly preventable with Black aging 20 and older twice as likely to have diabetics or diabetes. Dan R. White's Murray of 2003 described research indicate that the endemic stress in which daily basic stressors become exuberating through other stressors relating to an awareness of discrimination, marginalization can produce elevating states of psychological and social what they call psychological and physical social arousal. The research speculates that the epidemic stress experienced by blacks due to the disadvantage of oppression stem from continued racism appearing to lead to greater risk of hypertension and might also contribute to the level of type 2 diabetes. Damn. So not only your health, what you put in your mouth was the main culprit, but being in a racist society also increased it, which is surprising. It's not really surprising because you're always in a constant state of war amongst this environment, which our people are not really the majority in this country. But anyway, their studies focus specifically on diabetes in Black female because those women experience the dual epidemic stress arising from racism and sexism. They state that these interlocking oppression must be regarded as potential symbolic and the pressure of the exert over and various daily stresses Black women contend with and what mechanisms they use to cope with these pressures. The research credit in 2000, or actually credit in 1994, reports by Institute of Medicine encouraged researchers to consider the effects that social contexts such as society, community, family, and environment can exert on the management of chronic disease as serving as an inspiration for their own inquiries. A number of studies reflecting the impact of this report and the linking of environmental conditions, social force, and family and community factors to health problems, particularly in Black population. Murray exerted AI 2003 notes a link between diabetes and depression, observes that one of the psychologists or sociological manifestation of the disease poor glycemic control, which is characterized by severe swings in blood glucose levels, can produce depression and anxiety. They cite evidence that depression and anxiety rates are 2 to 4 times higher in diabetic populations than in the general population. The effects states, in turn, can further negative impact the diabetes condition because they may inhibit the individual ability to observe healthy care regimens. Based on their review of the range of studies across social and psychological and biomedical discipline, Murray proposed that Black women tend to internalize a message of self-reliance and relentlessly in the face of life challenges. To be a strong Black woman, a superwoman, is a good and necessary thing. As Murray argues, while this image may help Black women counter the adversities associated with the dual oppression of racism and sexism, it can distract these women from taking care of themselves and making the necessary lifestyle change to address chronic illness such as diabetes, hypertension. And that's a very good point right here by Murray. That because you say you're strong, Black, independent, and you do all the above just to counteract the adversity of what we call racism and oppression, and sexism, there is a trade-off to everything, ladies. The trade-off is your health will be declined and you could die prematurely. And what I read, and I'll probably read this again let me read again for those who didn't follow. To be strong black woman and superwoman is a good and necessary thing. Argue, while this image may help black women counter the adversity associated with dual oppression, racism, and sexism, but your health will decline, making necessary for lifestyle change to address chronic illness such as. So really, when they talk about when women check their health the most, to be honest with you, that's a lie. Especially if you are very obese. And like I said, most women will go to the hospital if they need to check some there's a pain. They're more of the initiative to take action more than men, which I give them credit for that to some degree. And I said to some degree. But overall, if you're a strong, independent black woman and you are a certain weight, obviously you're not really checking the doctor. And if the doctor's telling you that what you should be doing to correct your health, I don't think they're taking the advice of these doctors. Because there's no way how you go to a doctor and you like 50 or more pounds overweight and you check out everything, you're fine. No, you're not fine. Woo-woo. I see too many women from the Instagrams, the Facebooks, said where they post pictures of themselves and they are very obese. I saw one woman that's so obese, I know she's not really taking advice of a doctor in regards to maintain a healthy weight. But that's my opinion. I mean, that's a fact, and I'm just laying it out. Let's move on. Let me see how much more. Let's look and see how long this is. All right. All right. Depression. Although not necessarily linked to the prevalence of obesity, the experience of depression in Black female population appears to be indirect related to the issues of obesity, with the indirect relationship flowing in both directions. Depression can produce behavior that contributes to obesity, and obesity can trigger depression and to weight-relating problems and the negative impact self-esteem and effects. Depression in a form of silence is a thread that runs through a significant number of studies on Black women and others as they silence relate to the behavior to overcate, and it's by Benford, Lenford, 2008, and other authors stating here. And it describes silence as a feminist perspective on depression, links that the stress relating to sexism to repress anger, resentment, and despair. The suppression of these natural response to discrimination and internalized as necessary to get by in society and to not rock the proverbial boat or draw negative attention to oneness. And it is the suppression of those feelings that create depression and the individual becoming by silence these females and not giving them voice. The individual effective silence himself or herself. Silencing and the attaining depression who or also appears to occur in tandem with the experience of racism for many Blacks. Burtser and Smith Maheen, 2006, conducts a quantitative study of 15 Black men and women living in Topeka, Kansas, in an effort to illustrate their live experience of racism, discussing their identity as Black Americans and relating to possess such a shopping deal with law enforcement, work, and negotiating the difference between whites and Blacks. Life in Topeka, the subject reveals that discrimination based on race was pervasive in their daily exchange. Many of the subjects describe the function of silence in these daily interactions. In many instances, the individual felt unable to direct comfort the racism, and when they could do so, they often report being unheard in their complaints. Black women appear to be vulnerable to high rates of depression. There is also evidence that Black women may be less likely to seek assistance for their depression and may engage in silence behavior and avoidance coping strategies such as overeating to manage or rather mismanage their depression. And it's by Benoth LaFonte, 2008, and Hurd Blair or Bekeller, Pendlew, Neil Barrett, and Winsner, 2003. Note that for many years, research on female depression centers on the experience of white women, but they and others discuss how a growing focus on the particular problem and experience of Black women is emerging in the research literature. A number of studies consider that the review reflects these trends and are discussed briefly here to eliminate the ways in which the juncture of race and gender may define a different experience of depression and different approach to address or ignore it. Nicodemus Thomas or Timothy Thomas Walter Wallen Majid Michels, 2010, simply of 30 Black women recurring through community-based organization in Portland, Oregon. The women all evidenced depression disorder and had historically and victims of violence. Of these, 30.87% reports having received treatment for depression at some point to their lives, but less than half were involved in any form of treatment, intervention at the time of the study, based on structural interviews conducting across 4 focus groups in which the study's supply was subdivided. The research isolated 12 themes related to those women experience of depression and violence. Several of the themes most salient to the issue in this current study deal with views of the healthcare and social system. Many of the women report being exposed to messages that institutionalized health care was to avoid useless, absolute necessary. The women stated that their families reinforced the idea that problems, physical, emotional, psycho or psychological, should be handled by individuals alone. Other women identified that lingering influence of racism and exhibiting a mistrust of healthcare institutions, which they associate with white culture and discriminatory practice. And we're going to stop right here. This is written by Ward, 2009. There's a book called Medical Apartheid, the history of medical practice on African American people from enslavement up to the late 20th century. How they run a lot of experiments on not only on the men, but a lot of women in regards that some of them by the famous doctor, I forgot his name, but he used to test and know how the anatomy of women works, even childbearing, by practicing on live slaves, where they're, experiment the wombs of Black women, ripping them, taking babies, testing them, using devices how to retrieve safety birth in regards to medical science. This was all done by that same Caucasoid back in the 1800s. And y'all can find that in that same book if you get it. It's called Medical Apartheid by what her name? Harriet Washington. Yes. Let's continue. The woman in Nickelodeon excerpt 2010 studies identified depression symptoms as such as hopelessness, amnesia, or anhedonia, loss of energy, sadness, guilt, and in some instance, suicidal, what they call ideations, or suicidality. I don't know if I pronounced it right. However, for many of the women, antidepressants were not considered an option. Some of the women expressed resistance to being doped up, while others cite the need to remain strong and resilient and identify medical as a sign of weakness. This by Nicholas by 2010, page 1473. On a related note, many of the depressed Black women interviews also depress the desire towards self-care and self-counseling through their depression symptoms. Such of the women also experience mistrust and therapy or therapists, often along the lines of resistance to a white dominant culture and health practice, but more of the women were receptive to the potential for therapeutic intervention than were receptive to the use of antidepressants. In terms of desirable depressions, care that the women consistently express a preference for Black counselors and therapeutic staff perfectly professionally who had personally experienced of the issue of depression and violence with which these women were struggling. A study of racial identity and depression in Black women was present by settling narratives of Pangin, Abdul, and what they call Sadimis, 2010. The research survey of 379 Black women ages from 18 and older to assess the effects of Black identity, self-esteem, and depression. They image the multidimensional inventory of Black identity, MIBI, the Black Depression Inventory, and Rosenberg 10 items of self-esteem scale to determine whether moderating effects exist for these factors. The research found that Black women who had higher private regards to Black demonstrating low rates of depression. This was also true for Black women who report high public regards for Blacks. Their depression rate was very low. However, Black women who report low public regards on the racial identity measures were prone to great depression. Thus, the negative attitudes of the large society significant impacts them. Interestingly, the two types of regards did not appear to have a direct impact on one another. Black women report lower rates of depression if they only experience high levels of one form of regard, public or private, and not the other. The outcome of positive regards was beneficial either way. Racial certainty defines as the extent in which race is at the core of a person's self-identity and did not play a role in the relationship of public regards to depression, either positive or negative. And this is the racial centrality. However, racial centrality or centrality was a mitigation factor in terms of private regards for women with high racial, what they call centrality. Strong identification as a Black American, high levels of private regards correlate direct with lower rates of depression. However, women with high racial centrality who reflects low rates of private regards demonstrate a tendency towards higher rates of depression. This makes initiative sensitive when one breaks it down to basics of a woman who strongly identifies as Black but holds low positive views about Black in general or about being Black in America. And it makes you wonder why most Black people don't work together, they don't interact with each other, or do things as a collective. Interesting. All right. Being black in America, life is more likely to experience depression than either black women with high private regards and women with moderate to low racial centrality and either high or low private regards. Settles, 2010, expressed a sense of optimism about these findings in terms of providing direct for treating depression black women. They observed that a positive private regard appears to play a fundamental role in elevating depression, actually it's alleviating depression, antidepressant, intervention, might concentration on connection, black women more correctly or concretely and positively to other black people foster a sense of belonging. The beneficial aspect of this approach might be particularly salient for black women with a high levels of racial identity. Self-esteem was also found to play a significant role in mitigating or mitigating depression related to private and public regards. In the case of private regards in relations of direct and consistent with high self-esteem, tracing with high private regards and both linked to low depression, the effects of high self-esteem particularly mandates public regards impact on depression. Women with high self-esteem who report low public regards experience some admiration effects on depression, but depression was still a factor when both high self-esteem and low public regards coexist. Settles, 2010. Speculate that effects of low public regards, such as black female subjects, experience an incident of discrimination on racism, presents real-world obstacles that could be direct circumvent through high self-esteem. Whereas black women with high self-esteem appears to somewhat more protect from the ill effects of low public regards than were black women with low self-esteem. But they were not entirely insulated from the depression effects arising from the low public regards. Cotterill, etc., 2005, explores the relationship of such variables as environmental context, neighboring, social demographic factors, degrees of social disorders, level of social support available to members of a community, and depression. In black women, they conduct a 2-year longitude analysis of samples of 631 black women drawn from a large-scale study of black living outside of large urban areas called the Family of Community Health Study. They found that black women living in the most economically disadvantaged neighborhoods with high rates of social disorder were more prone to depression than were black women living in better neighborhoods. This remains true even when considered factors related to family and social support available to the women. The environmental conditions strongly impacts depression prevalence. However, the research also found that women in better neighborhoods were less likely to attribute the depression if experience a negative life events as the women in the poor neighborhood did. Thus, the women becomes depressed even though they were apparently not experiencing negative life events. The research observes that many of these better neighborhoods were dominant whites make the women minorities in their own neighborhoods. This results led them to suggest the greater study was needed on the potential for depression to occur among black females in relation to making their homes in a predominant white neighborhood. Miranda of 2005 explored difference in depression rates between several groups of black women, those born in the US and those born in Africa or the Caribbean, but who had immigrant to America. The quantitative analysis drew data from the Women's, Infant, and Children WIC Federal Assistance Program and gathered mental health problems information through the Primary Care Evaluation of Mental Disorders PRIME-MD survey, or they call Prime MD survey. Their large sample was predominantly composed of the U.S.-born Black women, 7,965, but there were significant samples for women born in Africa, 913, and those born in the Caribbean, 273. The U.S.-born Black women manifest starkly higher rates of depression, 2,409 times greater than the Caribbean-born Blacks, 2,904, and 2 times greater than African-born Black women. The difference suggests the epidemic stress related to racism may have a greater impact in U.S.-born Black women. Miranda, etc., suggests an explanation might be that Black women born in the countries that are Black-dominant cultures and societies may be exposed to protective factors which isolate them to a greater degree from an effect of racism and discrimination that they encounter in America. One notable discovery was the alcohol and drug abuse problems were negligible, or what they call negligible, across all three cohorts, with less than 1% of the women report sustainable abuse. As research note, sustaining abuse rates in white population and to some degree the Black male population suggests a much greater correlation between depression and substance problems. The difference for Black women suggests that they resort to other mechanisms in response to mental health problems. And we'll stop right there. And a side note, to a lot of people that are not born in America, as we know, this environment is conducive. It is actually toxic, but women do got some rights here in this country. Unlike the people that are predominant in so-called Black countries like the West Indies, Caribbean islands, that's part of the West Indies, Africa, and we could probably say South America potentially, but they only focus on actual Black countries, not the ones that are mixed countries. My conclusion to this is the reason why a lot of women that come here that don't experience racism until they've been here a little longer is because they're not inbred and born into this system. And yes, in a predominant Black country, there are certain treatments and certain things that you don't face overall. And I say overall, I think Africa is one of the good examples to the degree, but as you know, most other countries now have other foreigners in their country now colonizing or recolonizing their land, that if you have not seen depression or greater oppression, you have not seen nothing that was already here, what is to come in the coming years outside of America. Because if you look at predominant countries are not controlled by Black people entirely, unfortunately, and that's just the honest truth. So they might not experience the same racism that Black women have experienced for 300 or 400 years in this country. That doesn't get them off the hook to really not adapt and really overcome these obstacles we face now. Because oppression is global. And with a global system that implies oppression, either you're going to nest and adapt to this environment, or this environment will eat you alive or kill you, one or the other. So I'll end that here. And as you know, this is a very lengthy series. I'm not sure how much more pages left as I'm going down. Yeah, this is a very lengthy, and I still have a long way to go. So like always, I'll break this up in chapters. But at the end of the day, you know, this is a learning experience, and this channel is supposed to help to better educate on the problems, not only in society, but amongst Black people in general, in totality. Well, normally, like, as we go deeper into this myth of a strong black woman, we're gonna learn a lot of more things. So, thank you for listening to this stream. Be on the lookout for the next reading. Until then, take care.